The message came without warning, without kindness, and without shame. One sentence was all it took to shatter the life I thought I had built. Do not rely on me when you are old. I have my own family to care for. No explanation, no concern, just a cold reminder that love, in some families, has conditions. In that moment, I realized I was no longer seen as a mother, but as a burden. Years of sacrifice, support, and loyalty meant nothing. That message did not just break my heart, it changed the way I saw trust, family, and myself forever. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I am 69 years old. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, in a quiet riverside neighborhood where the days move slowly and the air always smells faintly of salt and jasmine. For most of my life, I believed I had built something solid and unbreakable. I was a high school teacher for over 30 years, the kind who stayed late to help struggling students and spent weekends grading papers at the kitchen table. Teaching was never just a job to me. It was my way of giving back to the community that had raised me. 6 years ago, my husband passed away after a sudden illness. Losing him changed everything, but it did not break me. We had built our life carefully, step by step, never spending more than we could afford, never relying on credit or shortcuts. The house by the river, where I still live today, took us nearly 3 decades to pay off. Every wall, every window, every creaking floorboard carries memories of the life we shared. To me, that house represents stability, patience, and the pride of standing on my own 2 feet. My days are simple now, but they are full. Every morning, I walk along the river as the sun rises over the water. In the afternoons, I read novels or tend to my small garden. On weekends, I volunteer at the local library, tutoring children who need extra help with their schoolwork. I stay active, both physically and mentally, and I take care of myself. I have never needed anyone to manage my life for me. I have one child, my son Ryan. He lives in Atlanta, Georgia, with his wife Melissa and their 2 young children. When Ryan was growing up, I did everything I could to support his dreams. I wanted him to have opportunities I never had. When he and Melissa bought their first home, I helped with the down payment. When the children started school, I contributed to their expenses. If an emergency came up, I was always there to help. At the time, none of this felt unusual. I believed that helping my son was simply part of being a good mother. I never expected anything in return. I did not ask for praise or gratitude. I just wanted to see my family happy and secure. For years, I told myself that Ryan had grown into a responsible man. He had a steady job, a family of his own, and a comfortable life in the city. When he called, I listened. When he needed advice, I offered it. I tried not to interfere because I believed in respecting his independence. I wanted to be supportive without being controlling. More than anything, I trusted him. To me, family meant loyalty. It meant showing up for one another, even when life was difficult. It meant kindness, patience, and understanding. I believed that the bond between a mother and her child was something permanent and unshakable. Looking back, I can see how confident I was in that belief. I never questioned Ryan's intentions. I never wondered whether my generosity might be taken for granted. I never imagined that the person I loved most in the world could see me as anything other than his mother. My life felt secure. My future felt predictable. I thought I understood the world I had built. But sometimes, the foundations you trust the most are the ones that crack without warning. I believed family was the safest place in the world. I was wrong. If you are still watching and want to know what warning signs I ignored before everything fell apart, please comment number 1 below to let me know you are with me. Now, let us move on to chapter 2. After my husband passed away, my relationship with Ryan changed in quiet, subtle ways. At first, his phone calls were what any mother would expect. He asked how I was feeling, told me about the children's school activities, and shared small updates about his work in Atlanta. Those conversations made me feel connected, even from a distance. I believed we were still close, just living separate lives. Over time, the tone of his calls shifted. The stories about family dinners and weekend trips became shorter, while conversations about financial concerns grew longer. There was always some new problem to solve. A roof repair that could not wait, unexpected school expenses for the children, a temporary cash shortage after a slow business month. None of these requests seemed unreasonable on their own. Life is expensive, and families face challenges. I reminded myself of that often. Melissa usually explained the details. Her voice was calm and polite, but it always felt carefully controlled, as if she were reading from a script. She thanked me for helping, assured me that the situation was temporary, and promised that things would improve soon. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe both of them. Still, a quiet discomfort began to settle in my chest. Every time Ryan called, the conversation drifted toward money. Even when I tried to change the subject, it always found its way back. I noticed how quickly he moved past questions about my life, my morning walks, my volunteer work, and my friends in Charleston no longer seemed to interest him. What mattered most was what I could provide. Then the questions about my house began. At first, Ryan simply asked how I was enjoying living by the river. Soon, he wanted to know how much the property might be worth. He asked whether houses in my neighborhood sold quickly. He wondered aloud if I had ever considered downsizing. His tone was casual, but the pattern was hard to ignore. One afternoon, he suggested that I might be happier living closer to him in Atlanta. He spoke about how much the grandchildren missed me and how convenient it would be if I were nearby. A few weeks later, he mentioned assisted living facilities, describing them as comfortable and social. I found the idea strange. I was healthy, active, and fully capable of managing my own life. There was no reason for me to give up my independence. When I gently questioned these suggestions, Ryan brushed them aside. He said he was only thinking about my future and my safety. I told myself he meant well. After all, what son would not want his mother to be secure? Yet, when I asked for clearer explanations about where my financial help was going, the answers became vague. Ryan avoided specifics. Melissa changed the subject. The details that once felt unimportant began to feel deliberately hidden. I told myself I was overthinking. I told myself that trust mattered more than suspicion. Deep down, I sensed an emotional distance growing between us. Our conversations felt less like family discussions and more like transactions. Still, I clung to the version of Ryan I remembered, the boy I had raised, the man I believed he had become. I did not want to believe that my own son could ever see me as a resource instead of a person. I did not want to accept the possibility that my kindness might be taken for granted. It was easier to ignore the warning signs than to confront the truth. So I kept answering the phone. I kept offering help. I kept telling myself that family deserved trust, even when something inside me whispered that I should be more careful. I chose comfort over caution. I chose hope over honesty. And in doing so, I walked willingly toward the moment that would change everything. If you are still here and wondering what message finally exposed the truth, please comment number 2 below so I know you are following the story. Now let us move on to chapter 3. The morning began like so many others in my Charleston home. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor, and the river outside my window moved in slow, gentle waves. I brewed my coffee, sat at the small wooden table my husband and I had shared for years, and enjoyed the quiet. At that moment, my life still felt steady and familiar. When my phone buzzed, I smiled. I expected a photo of my grandchildren or a short update from Ryan about his day. Those messages had become my connection to his world in Atlanta. I picked up the phone without any hesitation. The words on the screen did not match the warmth I had expected. "Mom, do not rely on me when you are old. I have my own family to care for." I stared at the message, unsure if I had read it correctly. I read it again, slower this time, letting each word sink in. There was no greeting, no explanation, just a clear, cold boundary. My first thought was confusion. We had spoken only a few days earlier, and nothing about that conversation had suggested anger or distance. There had been no argument, no disagreement, no warning. This message felt as though it had come out of nowhere. I felt a tightness in my chest, the kind that comes when something you trust suddenly cracks. I wondered what had pushed Ryan to write such a thing. Had I said something wrong? Had I asked for too much without realizing it? Or had this resentment been quietly growing for years? I considered how to respond. Part of me wanted to ask for an explanation. Another part of me wanted to remind him of everything I had done to support him throughout his life. I thought about defending myself, about telling him that I was still healthy and independent, that I had never asked him to take care of me. But as I sat there, holding my phone, I realized that none of those responses would change the message he had already sent. The words were clear. He was drawing a line, whether I agreed with it or not. So I chose not to argue. I chose not to plead. I typed one word: understood. When I pressed send, my hands were steady, even though my heart was not. That single word was not an agreement. It was an acceptance of reality. Ryan had made his priorities known, and I would respect them. The rest of the morning passed in silence. My coffee went cold. The river outside continued to move, unaware of the shift that had just taken place in my life. I felt a strange mixture of sadness and clarity. The sadness came from the realization that my relationship with my son was not what I had believed it to be. The clarity came from understanding that I needed to protect myself. That afternoon, I called my lawyer. We had worked together after my husband passed away to update my estate documents. He knew my situation, my finances, and my desire to remain independent. When he answered the phone, I told him I needed to review my plans again. I did not explain everything right away. I did not need to. I simply said that circumstances had changed and that I wanted to make sure my future was secure. After the call ended, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by the life I had built. The furniture, the photos, the quiet comfort of my home all reminded me of the years of effort it had taken to create stability. I realized that I had spent so much time supporting others that I had rarely stopped to protect myself. Ryan's message had been painful, but it had also been honest. He had shown me where I stood in his priorities. I could either ignore that truth or learn from it. I chose to learn. That message did not just change how I saw my son, it changed how I saw my own future. From that moment on, I understood that my security, my dignity, and my peace of mind were my responsibility. And I was ready to take them seriously. If that message shocked you and you want to see how I took control of my future, please comment number 3 below to stay with me. Now, let us move on to chapter 4. After Ryan sent that message, I did not rush into anything. I did not cry on the phone or confront him with anger. Instead, I sat quietly in my living room and thought about what his words truly meant. They were not a mistake. They were a statement of priorities. He had his own life, his own family, and I was no longer part of the future he imagined. The next day, I called my lawyer in Charleston and asked for an appointment. I wanted to make sure that my own future was just as carefully planned as the life I had already built. This was not about punishment or revenge. This was about responsibility. When I arrived at his office, we reviewed my existing estate documents. He explained that while a standard will offer some protection, a family trust would give me greater control over how my assets were managed and distributed. A trust would also make it harder for anyone to challenge my decisions later. I listened carefully. I asked questions. I wanted to understand every detail. Once I was confident, I agreed to move forward. The first step was transferring my Riverside home into the trust. That house represented decades of work, love, and sacrifice. Placing it into the trust felt symbolic, as if I was finally claiming ownership not just of the property, but of my independence. Next, we moved my savings and investment accounts. These were the funds my husband and I had built together, carefully and honestly. I wanted them protected, not vulnerable to pressure or expectation. Then came the most difficult part. Choosing new beneficiaries forced me to think deeply about what truly mattered to me. I selected a fund that supported retired teachers because education had shaped my entire life. I chose a center that helped women facing abuse because I believed in protecting those who needed it most. And I included my niece in Texas, who had always treated me with kindness without ever asking for anything in return. Ryan's name did not appear anywhere in the documents. That decision was not made in anger. It was made with clarity. He had told me where I stood in his priorities, and I had chosen to respect that boundary. Before leaving the office, I asked about my old joint bank account with Ryan. We had opened it years ago for convenience, when my husband was still alive. I realized how long I had allowed that connection to remain out of habit, not necessity. I closed the account. I opened a new one in my own name only. As I walked out of the bank, I felt something unexpected. It was not sadness. It was not fear. It was relief. For the first time in a long while, my finances reflected my reality. I was independent. I was capable. I did not need permission to protect what I had earned. Of course, there was still a quiet ache in my heart. Letting go of the version of my son I believed in was not easy. But I understood that holding on to illusions would only keep me vulnerable. That evening, I returned home and sat by the river as the sun set. The water moved steadily, just as it always had. Life continued, whether I resisted change or accepted it. I realized how long I had delayed making these decisions simply because I trusted Ryan. Trust, I had learned, must be balanced with awareness. I was not becoming colder. I was becoming wiser. My future no longer felt uncertain. It felt protected. I had taken control, not just of my finances, but of my sense of self. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. I was finally putting myself first. If you are curious about how my family reacted when they realized I was serious, please comment number 4 below. Now let us move on to chapter 5. I was pruning roses in my front yard when I heard a car pull into my driveway. The sound was sharp and sudden, breaking the quiet rhythm of my afternoon. I had not been expecting anyone. When I looked up, I saw Ryan and Melissa stepping out of their vehicle. They had driven all the way from Atlanta without calling first. Their arrival felt less like a visit and more like an intrusion. Ryan walked ahead of Melissa, his expression tight and impatient. They entered my home as if it still belonged to them, glancing around the living room with familiar confidence. I noticed how little attention they paid to me as a person. Their focus was on the space, the furniture, the river view. It felt as though they were inspecting something they believed should already be theirs. Ryan did not waste time with polite conversation. He brought up the family trust almost immediately. He said it was unreasonable. He said it was unfair. He said I had no right to make such decisions without consulting him. Melissa supported every word he said. She accused me of keeping money to myself when my own family needed help. She spoke about responsibility, about what a mother should do for her son. Her voice was calm, but the message was sharp. They insisted that the house should be in Ryan's name. They claimed it was meant to stay in the family. They spoke as if the years of work my husband and I had put into building our life did not matter. I listened quietly. Then I told them no. I explained that the house was mine, paid for with decades of honest effort. I reminded them that I was still capable of managing my own life. I told them that my finances were not open for negotiation. Ryan's face changed. The frustration he had been holding back finally surfaced. His voice grew louder. He accused me of being selfish. He said I did not need the money because I was old. He acted as if my age had erased my right to control my own future. The words hurt more than I expected, not because they were cruel, but because they revealed how he truly saw me. I was no longer his mother in that moment. I was an obstacle. I stood my ground. I told them that independence did not disappear with age. I told them that respect was not something a parent owed a child in exchange for money. It was something that should exist naturally within a family. The room felt heavy with tension. Melissa avoided my eyes. Ryan paced back and forth as if my home had become a battlefield rather than a place of comfort. I looked at my son and realized how unfamiliar he seemed. The boy I had raised, the one who once needed my guidance and care, had been replaced by someone who measured relationships in dollars and property. That realization brought a quiet sadness, but it also brought clarity. I asked them to leave. My voice was calm, but my decision was firm. This was my home. It was not a negotiation table. It was not a financial opportunity. It was the place where I had built my life. They left without apologizing. When the door closed behind them, the silence felt heavy but peaceful. I walked through the rooms of my house, touching the familiar walls, listening to the soft sounds of the river outside. Nothing had changed physically, yet everything felt different. That visit had confirmed what I already suspected. The conflict between us was no longer about misunderstanding. It was about entitlement. Ryan and Melissa had not come to reconnect with me. They had come to claim what they believed belonged to them. And for the first time, I understood that protecting my future would require more than quiet decisions. It would require strength. Because the people who should have respected me most were now the ones trying to take from me. The envelope arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, slipped through the mail slot in my front door. At first, I assumed it was another utility bill or a community newsletter. When I opened it and saw the legal letterhead, my stomach tightened. The words inside were formal, cold, and unmistakable. Ryan was challenging my mental competence. According to the document, I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. It suggested that my recent financial decisions were the result of confusion, grief, or outside influence. Reading those sentences felt like being erased, not just as a mother, but as a person. I was hurt, but I was not surprised. After their visit, I knew Ryan and Melissa would not accept my boundaries quietly. Still, seeing my own son question my sanity was a different kind of pain. I called my lawyer immediately. He explained the process in calm, practical terms. Ryan's legal team was requesting a formal evaluation to determine whether I was mentally fit to control my estate. If I refused, it could be used against me. So, I agreed to the examination. A week later, I sat in a quiet office across from a licensed medical professional. The room was bright and orderly, with shelves of books and a soft ticking clock. The evaluation was thorough. I was asked about my personal history, my daily routine, and my understanding of my finances. I completed memory tests, logic exercises, and problem-solving tasks. I answered every question clearly. I described my life in Charleston, my volunteer work, my financial decisions, and the reasons behind my trust. I explained why I had changed my estate plans and how I had done so thoughtfully, not impulsively. When the session ended, the doctor smiled politely and thanked me for my time. I left the office feeling calm. I had nothing to hide. The court hearing took place 2 weeks later. The courtroom was quiet and formal, filled with the soft echoes of footsteps and whispered conversations. Ryan and Melissa sat across from me, their expressions stiff and distant. They did not look at me. Their lawyer painted a picture of a vulnerable widow, struggling with grief and age. He suggested that I had been manipulated into making drastic financial changes. He spoke as if my entire life could be reduced to a single stereotype. Then my medical report was presented. The evaluation confirmed what I already knew. I was mentally sound. I demonstrated clear reasoning, strong memory, and a full understanding of my financial decisions. There was no evidence of confusion, decline, or outside influence. The judge listened carefully. When the ruling came, it was simple and direct. The case was dismissed. I retained full control over my estate and my future. There was no dramatic victory, no sense of triumph, just a quiet wave of relief. As I gathered my belongings, I felt the weight of what had happened. My own son had tried to take away my autonomy. Not because I was incapable, but because I would not give him what he wanted at society. Outside the courtroom, the air felt colder than usual. Ryan walked past me without a word. Melissa followed, her eyes fixed on the floor. The distance between us felt wider than any physical space. I stood there for a moment, watching them leave, and felt something shift inside me. The sadness was still there, but it was no longer mixed with doubt. I knew I had done the right thing. This was not just about money. It was about dignity. It was about my right to live the rest of my life on my own terms. The relationship I once believed was unbreakable had changed forever, but I was still standing. And for the first time, I understood that strength did not come from being needed. It came from knowing your own worth. If you are still watching and want to uncover the truth that finally came out after the court battle, please comment number 6 below, so I know you are with me. Now, let us move on to Chapter 7. After the court case ended, life in Charleston slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The river still moved gently past my home, the mornings were still quiet, and my routines remained the same. Yet something inside me had shifted. I felt relief that my independence had been protected, but the disappointment I carried toward my son was heavier than I expected. My lawyer suggested that we take one final step, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. He believed it would be wise to understand the full picture of Ryan's financial behavior. At first, I hesitated. I did not want to go searching for more reasons to feel hurt. But deep down, I knew the truth would help me let go of the doubts that still lingered. So I agreed to hire a private investigator. The process was quiet and professional. I was not involved in the details. I simply waited. Days passed, and with each passing day, I wondered what I might learn. Part of me hoped the findings would prove that Ryan had only made a few poor decisions. Another part of me feared the reality would be much worse. When the report arrived, I sat at my kitchen table and opened it slowly. The pages told a story I had never wanted to read. Ryan had been living far beyond his means for years. His debts were extensive, spread across multiple credit accounts and personal loans. The money he earned was not enough to support the lifestyle he and Melissa had chosen. Vacations, luxury purchases, private school tuition, and expensive upgrades had all been paid for with borrowed money. What hurt most was not the spending itself. It was the reason behind it. The report showed that Ryan had taken out loans based on what lenders believed he would eventually inherit from me. My future had been used as financial collateral. My death had been treated as a business plan. There were also records of inquiries Ryan had made about speeding up inheritance processes. He had explored legal options, searching for ways to gain access to my assets sooner rather than later. Even though nothing illegal had been finalized, the intention was clear. I felt a deep ache in my chest as I read each page. For years, I had trusted my son completely. I had believed that my generosity was appreciated, not expected. Now I saw how my kindness had been quietly turned into an opportunity. This was not a sudden change in Ryan's behavior. It had been building for a long time. The requests for help, the vague explanations, the pressure about my home and my future had all been part of a larger pattern. The realization was painful, but it also brought clarity. My lawyer helped me prepare a formal letter. It was not emotional or angry. It was factual and direct. The letter stated that I was aware of Ryan's financial misconduct and that I would no longer provide any financial assistance under any circumstances. When I signed it, my hand did not shake. I sent the letter without hesitation. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of emotional closure. I had stopped pretending that everything could return to the way it once was. I had stopped protecting a version of my son that no longer existed. Accepting the truth did not erase the sadness, but it gave me peace. Ryan would now have to face the consequences of his own choices. I could no longer carry that burden for him. As the sun set over the river that evening, I sat on my porch and watched the sky change colors. The world felt quiet again. Not empty, just calm. I had chosen honesty over denial. And for the first time, that choice felt like freedom. After I sent the legal letter, a quiet calm settled over my life in Charleston. The constant tension I had carried for months began to fade. I no longer woke up wondering what my son might do next, or how far he would push. For the first time in a long while, my thoughts were my own. I decided to return to the parts of life I had set aside. One afternoon, I walked into a small community center near the river and signed up for a dance group for older women. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and lavender cleaner. At first, I felt awkward moving my body to music again. My steps were stiff, and I worried about looking foolish. But after a few weeks, the rhythm felt natural. I laughed more. I breathed more deeply. I remembered what it felt like to enjoy movement without fear or pressure. I continued volunteering at the public library, but I expanded my role. Instead of only helping with reading, I began tutoring children from low-income families. Some of them struggled with confidence, not just homework. Sitting across from them, guiding them through difficult lessons, reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place. Their progress felt meaningful in a way that money never could. On weekends, I traveled along the South Carolina coast with friends. We walked on quiet beaches, shared simple meals, and talked about life without judgment. There was comfort in being surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not for what I owned. I also returned to painting, a hobby I had abandoned years ago. My first attempts were clumsy, but the process itself was freeing. Each brushstroke felt like a small declaration of independence. My home slowly filled with colors that reflected peace rather than worry. What surprised me most was how different independence felt from loneliness. I had once believed the two were the same. Now I understood that independence meant choosing connection without surrendering control. It meant enjoying companionship without sacrificing self-respect. My health improved, not because of any medical change, but because my spirit felt lighter. I slept better. I smiled more easily. The quiet moments in my home no longer felt empty. They felt peaceful. I learned how to say no without guilt, no to unnecessary obligations, no to emotional manipulation, no to waiting for people to become who they refuse to be. I stopped expecting Ryan to change. That hope had kept me tied to disappointment for too long. Accepting reality did not erase the love I had for him, but it freed me from the weight of false expectations. Instead, I built a new support system. Friends from the dance group, fellow volunteers, and neighbors became part of my daily life. We shared stories, laughter, and quiet understanding. Slowly, my identity shifted. I was still a mother, but I was no longer defined only by that role. I was a woman with interests, values, and a future of her own choosing. For the first time in years, I felt proud of myself, not for what I had given, but for what I had protected. The peace I found was not loud or dramatic. It was steady, gentle, and deeply personal. And it belonged to me. If you are still here and want to see how everything truly ended, please comment number 8 below to stay with me. Now, let us move on to the final part of this story. News has a quiet way of finding you in a town like Charleston. I did not go looking for information about Ryan and Melissa, but over time, the details reached me. Their financial situation had collapsed. The debts they had carried for years finally caught up with them. They declared bankruptcy. The house in Atlanta was gone. They had moved in with Melissa's family, their lifestyle reduced to something far more modest than the one they once displayed so proudly. When I first heard, I did not feel relief. I did not feel satisfaction. What I felt was sadness. No mother dreams of seeing her child struggle. Even after everything that had happened, the instinct to protect him still lived somewhere inside me. But I also knew that stepping in would only reopen wounds that were finally beginning to heal. Helping again would not fix the deeper problem. It would only repeat the same cycle. What weighed on me most were my grandchildren. They had been pulled out of their private school. Their routines were disrupted. Their world had become smaller and more uncertain, all because of choices they never made themselves. I worried about how the stress might affect them, how confusion and instability could shape their young minds. My heart ached for them in a way words could not fully express. Still, I kept my distance. I did not call Ryan. I did not offer money. I did not step back into the role of rescuer. That choice was not easy. There were nights when I sat alone in my living room, staring at old family photographs. I remembered Ryan as a little boy, full of laughter and curiosity. I remembered the dreams I once had for his future, the life I hoped he would build. Letting go of those expectations felt like mourning someone who was still alive. But I also understood something important. Being a mother did not mean sacrificing my dignity. For years, I had believed that love required endless giving. Now I knew that real love also required boundaries. I could care about my son without allowing myself to be used. I could worry about my grandchildren without allowing their parents to manipulate me through guilt. My role had changed. I was no longer the woman who fixed every problem. I was the woman who chose peace over chaos, clarity over confusion. There was a quiet strength in that. I allowed myself to grieve the relationship I once wanted. I allowed myself to feel the loss without blaming myself for it. Some things, I realized, cannot be repaired no matter how much love you offer. And yet, despite the sadness, I felt proud. Proud that I had protected what my husband and I built. Proud that I had stood firm when it would have been easier to give in. Proud that I had learned to value my own well-being. Not every victory feels joyful. Some come wrapped in disappointment and grief, but they still matter. As the evening light faded over the river, I reminded myself that strength is not measured by how much you endure for others. Sometimes, it is measured by how well you learn to protect yourself. Looking back now, it is difficult to believe how much my understanding of family has changed. For most of my life, I believed that love meant giving without limits. I believed that a mother's role was to sacrifice, to endure, and to place her child's needs above her own, no matter the cost. That belief shaped many of my choices, and for a long time, I thought it made me strong. The truth is, it also made me vulnerable. Being betrayed by my own son was one of the most painful experiences I have ever faced. The hurt did not come from money or legal battles. It came from realizing that someone I trusted so deeply could see me as something to use rather than someone to respect. That realization forced me to confront a difficult truth about love. Love without boundaries is not kindness. It is permission for others to take advantage of you. I learned that protecting myself was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of self-respect. For years, I had measured my worth by how much I gave to others. Now, I measure it by how well I honor my own values. Setting boundaries did not make me colder. It made me clearer. It allowed me to live with dignity instead of obligation. Age does not take away a woman's right to control her life. It does not erase her voice, her wisdom, or her authority over the future she has built. I am still the same woman who worked for decades, loved deeply, and survived loss. The only difference now is that I no longer confuse sacrifice with love. My idea of legacy has changed as well. It is not about what someone inherits in dollars or property. It is about what they learn from the way we live. My legacy is found in the children I helped at the library, the friends who stood by me, and the values I chose to protect when it mattered most. It is found in the strength I discovered when I stopped waiting for approval. I still love my son. That love did not disappear, but it no longer controls my choices. I have accepted that some relationships cannot be repaired, no matter how much history they carry. Acceptance does not mean forgetting. It means releasing the expectation that things will return to what they once were. What remains is peace. I wake up each morning without fear. I move through my days without guilt. My home feels like a place of comfort again, not conflict. I have built a life that reflects who I am now, not who others wanted me to be. To anyone who feels trapped by obligation, I want you to know this. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to choose dignity over approval. Love should never cost you your sense of worth. The journey was painful, but it taught me something powerful. Self-respect is not something you lose with age. It is something you earn, and I finally earned mine. In the end, this story is not really about money, conflict, or even family. It is about self-respect. It is about learning that love does not mean accepting harm, and that loyalty should never require the loss of dignity. Sometimes the hardest lesson is realizing that protecting your peace is not selfish. It is necessary. Strength is not measured by how much you endure, but by how wisely you choose your path forward. Every person, at any stage of life, deserves to feel valued, heard, and respected. When boundaries are set with honesty, they become the foundation of a healthier future. And when courage replaces fear, healing finally begins. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it touched you in any way, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences matter. Do not forget to like, follow, and subscribe for more meaningful stories that inspire strength, reflection, and self-worth.